At the edge of the Gobi Desert, where the dry dust seemed to burn to the bone and the nights whispered in dialects forgotten by any modern cartographer, a man named Darley arrived with a mission to map strange seismic phenomena. At 44, Darley wasn't exactly a traditional scientist. He'd been an army survival instructor, then spent a few years as a field analyst for an environmental exploration organization funded by a Swiss consortium. He had sunken eyes, calloused hands, and a stubbornness only understood by those who'd seen people die in the wilderness without water. He was there out of sheer obstinacy because no one else wanted to go. No one ever wanted to go to that place. The base he set up was simple: a reinforced canvas tent, seismic measurement equipment, thermal sensors, and a satellite communication antenna. But from the very first day, something felt out of sync with reality. The sensors were constantly out of tune. The compass spun when pointed north. The wind changed direction in an instant, and at night the sand moved as if breathing beneath his feet. It wasn't a metaphor. Darley saw it. The sand pulsed. On the second day, he found a figure. It was a dehydrated woman, naked from the waist up, covered in grayish dust. She appeared out of nowhere, as if she had sprouted from the sand. She didn't speak. She just trembled and pointed to the ground, mumbling a word in a guttural language that didn't seem to be from Earth. He tried to contact his base in Hohhot by radio, but the signal only returned static, as if blocked by some invisible force. He tried to care for the woman, offering water and shelter, but she refused any contact. She cried silently, as if eternally in mourning. In the early hours of the third day, Darley awoke to the sound of screams, high-pitched, impossibly long screams, as if someone was being dragged for miles with their throat open. The woman was no longer there. In the sand, only a deep trail, as if a body had been pulled by the legs in a straight line for over 100 meters. No footprints, no surrounding scratches, just the drag mark. Despair began to coil in his mind. He was a rational, cold, methodical man. But now he was alone, trapped in a desert that seemed to have a will of its own, where bodies appeared and vanished, and the nocturnal whispers seemed to seep into his skin. Darley decided he needed to understand what was happening there. In his army years, he had seen the worst of humanity, but nothing prepared him to face the desert that now breathed an ancient fury. At dawn, he gathered his equipment and followed the trail in the sand, trying to decipher if there was something beyond a simple natural phenomenon. It was then that, a few meters from the drag line, he found a series of symbols scratched into the stone, drawings that looked like maps but vibrated with a cold energy that permeated his skin. He couldn't explain it, but he had a feeling those symbols wanted to speak. The moment he stared at them, he heard a whisper behind him. It was a thin, almost ethereal voice, calling his name, repeating it in a tone that mixed invitation and threat. He slowly turned and saw a slender shadow among the dunes, a tall, hooded figure that seemed to undulate like smoke from a fire. Darley tried to communicate, but the figure didn't respond. Gradually, he realized that the desert was not just a place of physical death, but a prison for lost souls. People who had disappeared there over decades, dragged by the veil he now felt around his body, a dark mist that clung to the air as if alive. For days, Darley suffered visions. He saw his own distorted past, moments he preferred to forget, but which the desert revealed without permission. On one of those nights, he awoke with deep marks on his back, as if invisible claws had passed there, leaving wounds that didn't bleed, but burned with unbearable pain. During one of his walks, Darley found another body, an older man from a nearby village who had disappeared 3 months prior. The corpse was covered by a black veil, his face disfigured in an expression of pure terror. When Darley tried to approach, he heard a low, creeping laugh that seemed to emanate from the sand. It was the laugh of that which he could not name, the guardian of the dragged souls. And then came the real fear. Darley realized that this place sucked everything dry, not just life, but sanity. With every step he took, the black mist tried to cling tighter to his skin, whispering promises and threats in forgotten tongues. If you're feeling the shivers and the tension building, go ahead and hit that like button, because I need to know if you want to unravel this mystery with me. But listen, I don't just want any comment. I want you to tell me, in the comments, what your worst experience was that made you feel something was truly wrong, something you haven't been able to explain to this day. I want us to create a community where horror stories and the inexplicable become one place to share fear and courage. And of course, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a lot more darkness coming, and you won't want to miss a second of this journey. Darley was increasingly immersed in that nightmare. The heat of the day gave way to cold, suffocating nights where the black mist seemed to take shape, dancing around him as if it had a life of its own. On one of those nights, he heard a different voice, clearer, more human, a voice that asked for his help, pleading for him to follow it towards a hidden cave in the nearby rocks. Desperate, Darley walked to the indicated spot, feeling his breathing heavy and his pulse racing. The cave entrance was small, almost invisible, but from it emanated a cold that cut to the bone. When he entered, the walls were covered with strange inscriptions and grotesque drawings, scenes of sacrifices and obscure rituals dating back centuries. At the back of the cave, Darley found something he could never have imagined. A kind of altar made of bones and black stones, where a hooded figure knelt, murmuring in an ancient language. Upon sensing his presence, the figure turned, revealing a face that looked like a mask made of rotting flesh, with empty eyes that pierced the soul. The being began to chant a song that made the ground tremble, and the mist invade the cave with terrifying force. Darley tried to flee, but he felt as if his legs were trapped in quicksand, unable to move. The altar glowed with a blinding purple light, and amidst the chaos, he saw faces emerging from the walls, faces of all the desert's victims, crying out for justice, vengeance, or perhaps liberation. At that moment, Darley understood the cruel truth. The desert was not just a place, it was a spiritual prison, an abyss where tormented souls were trapped, feeding an entity that fed on fear and suffering. And now, he too was part of this eternal cycle. With his last breath, Darley felt his consciousness dissolve into the black mist, as his voice joined the others, echoing forever in the silence of the desert. After Darley's disappearance, a team of local archaeologists decided to investigate the mysterious stories surrounding the desert where it all happened. Among them was the experienced geologist Renata, who had been studying rock formations in the region for years, but had never encountered anything as disturbing as that place. Upon reaching the cave entrance, the group felt an inexplicable weight in the air, as if the environment itself was trying to push them away. Renata tried to focus on her work, but couldn't ignore the feeling that something was watching them, invisible and hungry. During the exploration, they found human remains partially covered by sand and mud, the bones stained by a black, sticky substance that seemed to pulse. When night fell, the team set up camp near the cave. It was then that they began to hear noises coming from inside, like dragging footsteps and muffled groans. Renata, curious and restless, decided to investigate alone, using only her flashlight. Upon entering, she noticed that the inscriptions on the walls seemed to have been renewed, as if someone or something had returned to mark its presence. Advancing deeper, she came across a scene of horror. Hooded figures, similar to the one Darley had seen, emerged from the shadows, their bodies twisted and covered in a viscous substance that resembled rotting skin, yet still pulsed with life. Renata tried to retreat, but the passage seemed endless. like a labyrinth that changed its structure to trap her. Voices arose around her, whispering curses and revealing ancient secrets of a people who had been sacrificed in rituals to contain the entity that inhabited the desert. Suddenly, a shrill scream echoed through the cave. Renata saw her team being attacked one by one by the creatures emerging from the ground. The horror unfolded in slow motion, limbs being torn off, bodies twisting in agony until only shadows and echoes of suffering remained. In the last instant, Renata found a symbol engraved on the wall, a sign of protection, perhaps a last hope to stop what had been awakened. With her last strength, she drew the symbol on the ground, and as the creatures advanced, an intense light emanated from the drawing, causing the shadows to recoil, opening a path for her desperate escape. But the scar of that place would never leave her. She knew that in fleeing, she not only escaped death but also carried with her an invisible mark, a silent pact with the darkness that inhabited that forgotten desert. Renata managed to get out of the cave, staggering, her face covered in mud and her heart ablaze. She knew she had escaped certain death, but the price would be high. That experience would leave permanent marks, and the presence of evil now seemed to inhabit her, as alive as fear itself. Upon returning to the nearest town, Renata tried to warn the authorities, but the disbelief and fear of the residents were as great as the silence of the officials. Soon after, reports began to surface of disappearances, screams tearing through the night, and shadowy figures with black eyes seen at the roadside. Renata, tormented by sleepless nights and nightmares where she saw the hooded figures and black bones, decided to share her story on an anonymous network to warn anyone who might be interested. She knew many might not believe her, but she felt something had to be done before the darkness consumed everything. As the days passed, the influence of that malevolent presence began to spread, corrupting not only the land, but the minds of the people. Some who had visited the site began to act strangely, speaking in unknown languages, drawing impossible symbols on the walls of their homes. In her last message, Renata pleaded for no one to approach that region, a warning that came too late. For many, the desert's curse continued to grow, silent and lethal, awaiting the next reckless soul who dared to awaken what should remain buried. Thus, the story that began with a simple disappearance transformed into a dark legend, a whisper that never ceases, a presence that haunts those who dare to challenge the invisible. And in the middle of the desert, the void holds secrets that should never be unveiled. If you've followed along this far, you've realized how certain stories transcend the bounds of the natural and make us question what truly exists beyond our perception. If this narrative moved you, how about leaving a comment telling us if you've ever felt something similar? Have you ever had an experience you can't explain? Share it with us. Let's create a community where fear and mystery meet, so no one feels alone in the face of the inexplicable. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's your chance to join us on this dark journey. There are many more stories that will make your heart race and your mind restless. Subscribe, hit the bell icon, and come be part of this network of stories that defy silence. Before I finish, I want to extend a special invitation. Tell us what you learned from this story. Is there really something that shouldn't be awakened, or is it all just an urban legend? Your opinion is essential to keep this conversation alive. Horror is also a space for reflection. Until the next account, where the supernatural meets the real and fear becomes almost palpable, stay vigilant and above all, be careful what you seek in the dark.